The Sorcerer's Stone, Chapter 7, The Sorting Hat. The Sorcerer's Stone, Chapter 7, The Sorting Hat. The door swung open at once. A tall, black-haired witch in an emerald green robe stood there. She had a very stern face, and Harry's first thought was that this was not someone to cross. The first years, Professor McGonagall said, haggard. Thank you, Haggard. I will take them from here. She pulled the door wide, and the entrance hall was so big you could have fitted the whole of the Dursleys' house in it. The stone walls were lit with flaming torches like the ones at Gringotts. The ceiling was too high to make out, and a magnificent marble staircase facing them led them to the upper floors. They followed Professor McGonagall across the flagged stone floor. Harry could hear the drone of hundreds of voices from the doorway to the right. The rest of the school must already be here, but Professor McGonagall showed the first years into a small empty chamber off the hall. They crowded in, standing closer together than they would probably rather have done, peering about nervously. Welcome to Hogwarts, said Professor McGonagall. The start of the term banquet will begin shortly, but before you take your seats in the Great Hall, you will be sorted. Into your houses. The sorting is a very important ceremony because while you're here, your house will be something like your family within Hogwarts. You will have classes with the rest of your house, sleep in your house dormitory, and spend free time in your house common room. The 4 houses are called Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin. Each house has its own noble history, and each has produced outstanding witches and wizards. While you're here at Hogwarts, your trumpets will earn your house points, while any rule breaking will lose points. At the end of the year, the house with the most points is awarded the House Cup, a great honor. I hope each of you will be a credit to whichever house becomes yours. The sorting ceremony will take place in a few minutes in front of the rest of the school. I suggest you all smarten yourselves up as much as possible while you're waiting. Her eyes lingered a moment on Neville's cloak, which was fastened under his left ear on Ron's smudged nose. Harry nervously tried to flatten his hair. I shall return for you when you are ready, said Professor McGonagall. Please wait quietly. She left the chamber. Harry swallowed. How exactly do they sort us in houses? Asked Ron. Some sort of test, I think. Fred said it hurts a lot, but I think he was joking. Harry's heart gave a horrible jolt. A test in front of the whole school? But he didn't know of any magic yet. What on earth could he have to do? He hadn't expected on something like this the moment they arrived. He looked around anxiously and saw that everyone else looked terrified too. No one was talking much except Hermione Granger, who was whispering very fast about all the spells she had learned and wondering which she'd need. Harry tried not to listen to her. He had never been more nervous, never, not even when he had to take a school report home to the Dursleys saying that he had somehow turned his teacher's wig blue. He kept his eyes fixed on the door. Any second now, Professor McGonagall will come back and lead them to his doom. Then something happened which made him jump about a foot in the air. Several people behind him screamed. What the? He gasped. So did the people around him. About 20 ghosts had just streamed through the back wall. Pearly white and slightly transparent, they glided across the room, talking to each other and hardly glancing at the first years. They seemed to be arguing. What looked like a fat little monk was saying, "Forgive and forget. I say we ought to give him a second chance. My dear Friar, but haven't we given Peeves all the chances he deserves? He gives us all a bad name, you know, and he's not really even a ghost. I say, what are you all doing here?" A ghost wearing a ruff and tights had suddenly noticed the first years. No one answered. "New students," said the fat friar, smiling at them. "About to be sorted, I suppose." A few people nodded mutely. "Hope to see you in Hufflepuff," said the friar. "My old house, you know." "Move along now," said a sharp voice. "The sorting ceremony is about to start." Professor McGonagall had returned. One by the ghosts floated away through the opposite wall. "Now, form a line," Professor McGonagall told the first years, "and follow me." Feeling oddly as though his legs had turned to lead, Harry got into line behind the boy with sandy hair, with Ron behind him, and they walked out of the chamber, back across the hall through a pair of double doors into the great hall. Harry had never imagined such a strange and splendid place. It was lit by thousands and thousands of candles which were floating in mid-air over all 4 long tables where the rest of the students were sitting. The tables were laid with glittering golden plates and goblets. At the top of the hall there was another table where the teachers were sitting. Professor McGonagall led the first years up here so that they came to a halt in a line facing the other students with the teachers behind them. The hundreds of faces staring at them looked like pale lanterns in the flickering candlelight. Dotted here and there among the students, the ghosts shone silvery, misty silver. Mainly to avoid looking at staring eyes, Harry looked upward and saw a black, velvety ceiling dotted with stars. He heard Hermione whisper, "It's bewitched to look like the sky outside. I read about it in Hogwarts, a history." It was hard to believe there was a ceiling there at all, and that the great hall didn't simply open up into the heavens. Harry quickly looked down again as Professor McGonagall silently passed a 4-legged stool in front of the first year. On top of the stool, she put a pointed wizard's hat. The hat was patched and frayed and extremely dirty. Aunt Petunia wouldn't have let this be in her house. Maybe they had tried to get a rabbit out of it. Harry thought wildly that it seemed to be that sort of thing. Noticing that everyone in the hall was now staring at the hat, he stared at it too. For a few seconds there was complete silence. Then the hat twitched. A rip near the brim opened up wide like a mouth, and the hat began to sing. "Oh, you may not think I'm pretty, but don't judge me on what you see. I'll eat myself if you can find me a smarter hat than me. You can keep your bowlers black, your top hats sleek and tall, for I am the Hogwarts sorting hat, and I can cap them all. There's nothing hidden in your head the sorting hat can't see, so try me on and I will tell you where you ought to be. You might belong in Gryffindor, where dwell the brave at heart. Their daring nerve and chivalry set Gryffindors apart. You might belong in Hufflepuff, where they are just as loyal, and these patient Hufflepuffs are true and unafraid of toil. Or yet in wise old Ravenclaw, if you have a ready mind, where those of wit and learning will always find their kind. Or perhaps in Slytherin you'll make your real friends. Those cunning folks use any means to achieve their ends. So put me on, don't be afraid, and don't get in a flap. You're in safe hands, though I have none, for I am a thinking cap." The whole hall burst into applause as the hat finished his song. It bowed to each of the 4 tables and then became quite still again. "So we've just got to try the hat on the hat," Ron whispered to Harry. "I'll kill Fred. He was going on about wrestling a troll." Harry smiled weakly. Yes, trying on the hat was a lot better than having to do a spell, but he did wish they could have tried it on without everyone watching. The hat seemed to be asking a rather lot. Harry didn't feel brave or quick-witted or anything at the moment. If only the hat had mentioned a house for people who felt a bit queasy, that would have been the one for him. Professor McGonagall now stepped forward, holding a long roll of parchment. "When I call your name, you will put on the hat and sit on the stool and be sorted," she said. "Abbot Hannah." A pink-faced girl with blonde pigtails stumbled out of the line and put on the hat, which fell right down over her eyes, and sat down. A moment pause. "Hufflepuff!" shouted the hat, and the table on the right cheered and clapped as Hannah went to sit down at the Hufflepuff table. Harry saw the ghost of the fat friar waving merrily at her. "Bones, Susan Hufflepuff!" shouted the hat again, and Susan scurried off to sit next to Hannah. "Boot, Terry." "Ravenclaw." The second table from the left clapped. This time, several Ravenclaws stood up to shake hands with Terry as he joined them. Brocklehurst Mandy went to Ravenclaw too, but Brown Lavender became the first new Gryffindor at the table on the far left, exploded with cheers. Harry could see Ron's twin brother catcalling, "Boldstrog Millicent," and then became a Slytherin. Perhaps it was Harry's imagination. After all, he had heard about Slytherin, but he had thought they looked an unpleasant lot. He started to feel definitely sick now. He remembered being picked for teams during sport lessons at his old school. He had always been the last to be chosen, not because he was no good, because no one wanted Dudley to think they liked him. Finch, Fletley, Justin, Hufflepuff. Sometimes, Harry noticed, the hat shouted out the house at once, but at others it took a while to decide. Finnegan Seamus, a sandy-haired boy next to Harry in line, stood on the stool for almost a whole minute before the hat declared him a Gryffindor. Hermione Granger Hermione. Hermione almost ran to the stool and jammed the hat on eagerly. "Gryffindor," shouted the hat. Ron groaned. A horrible thought struck Harry, as horrible thoughts always do when you're very nervous. What if he wasn't chosen at all? What if he just sat there with the hat over his eyes for ages until Professor McGonagall jerked it off his head and said there had obviously been a mistake and he had better get back on the train? When Neville Longbottom, the boy who kept losing his toad, was called, he fell over on his way to the stool. The hat took a long time to decide with Neville, and then it finally decided Gryffindor. Neville ran off still wearing it, and had to jog back amid scales of laughter to give it to McGonagall. Morag. Malfoy swaggered forward when his name was called and got his wish at once. The hat had barely touched his head when it screamed Slytherin. Malfoy went to join his friends, Crabbe and Goyle, looking pleased with himself. There weren't too many people left now. Moon, Knott, Parkinson, then a pair of twin girls, Patel and Patel, and then Perks, Sally Ann, and then at last Harry Potter Harry. As Harry stepped forward, whispers suddenly broke out like little hissing fires all over the hall. Potter? Did she say Potter? The Harry Potter? The last thing Harry saw before the hat was dropped over his eyes was the hall full of people craning to get a good look at him. Next second, he was looking at the black inside of the hat. He waited. A small voice in his ear. Difficult, very difficult. Plenty of courage, I see. Not a bad mind either. There's talent. Oh my goodness, yes. And a nice thirst to prove yourself. Now that's interesting. So, where shall I put you? Harry gripped the edges of the stool and thought, not Slytherin, not Slytherin. Not Slytherin, eh? Said the small voice. Are you sure? You could be great. You know, it's all in your head, and Slytherin will help you on to the way to greatness. No doubt about that. No? Well, if you're sure, better be Gryffindor. Harry heard the hat shout the last word to the whole hall. He took off the hat and walked shakily to the Gryffindor table. He was so relieved to have been chosen and not put in Slytherin, he had hardly noticed that he was getting the loudest cheer yet. Percy, the prefect, got up and shook his hand vigorously, while the Weasley twins yelled, "We got Potter! We got Potter!" Harry sat down opposite the ghost in the rough he had seen earlier. The ghost patted his arm, giving Harry the sudden horrible feeling he had just plunged into a bucket of ice-cold water. He could see the high table properly now, and at the end nearest Nearest him sat Hagrid, who caught his eye and gave him a thumbs up. Harry grinned heavier and heavier, and he tried